Hi, and welcome to the dinner agenda. This is Bo.
And this is CeeLo.
Hello, CeeLo.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm not too bad.
Yeah?
Yeah. What have you been up to lately? Your renos going well?
I don't want to talk about my fucking renos. I do not want to talk. I don't want to talk about my renos. And partly because every time I talk about these fucking renos, somebody suggests something to change something. Like you, as an example. When you were at my house the other day and you were like, well, why don't you do this? And I'm just like, geez, I can't make any more decisions. I can't do it. So no, I don't want to talk about my renos.
I think I had good ideas.
You do. Saying. You've got great ideas, but I'm just like done thinking about it.
Yeah, I think once you just want to set it and forget it.
Absolutely. That sounds like an infomercial.
I think it is. Set
Ron
it and forget
Popeil?
it. Yeah.
Set it and forget it? Okay.
Set it and forget it in your crock pot.
I don't think he sold a crock pot.
I think he did.
I think it was a toaster oven or something.
Okay, whatever.
Okay, you're just like rowdy today.
Rowdy.
What the shit?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I have kind of a funny thing, and I'm wondering if you have a similar circumstance in your house. So,
what?
You know, like, it's Friday night, it's 8 o'clock. Maybe I could get in a whole movie, maybe just a show, depending on the week, right? Because I'm going to bed early these days. Mm-hmm. And we don't have any show necessarily going on. Like, we don't have one that's in progress. It's a new show. We need a new show. And we start looking on the Netflix, and we start looking on the Prime. And Mel's got a whole bunch of different shows saved to the My List or whatever it is. But then she'll start to go through them. And then I'll be like, okay, that one you were just on, that one right there. Yeah, let's start that one. She's like, wait a second, I think I got My List going on Netflix as well. Let's check that. And I'm like, but I'm pretty sure I said I was good with the other one that, okay, let's watch some more trailers. And so we'll watch trailers and then I'll say, yep, that one looks good. Because they all look good. She's picked great ones for the list.
Yeah. And
I look at the preview or the trailer. I'm like, yeah, I'm on side. It's not sci-fi because I don't like no fucking sci-fi. But whatever it is, I'm like, yeah, let's do it. And she'll keep going through the trailers that she's already watched, that she's already put on her list as something she wants to watch. But then it's like this inability to make a decision. And I don't understand it. And I feel like maybe it goes back to like the Blockbuster days.
Yeah.
You know, where you paid your $5 and you cart that fucking VHS home and you put it in and you're 5 minutes in and you're like, this is shit.
Yes. Yeah.
And you have regret, right? You have buyer's remorse.
Yeah.
Where you're like,
it could. I don't know if it's that. It's the need to actually get that perfect decision made of what to watch because she's so desperately wanting to be entertained.
Something good.
Yeah, and that she doesn't want to like have a disappointment. But you know what? Dave and I do the same in a way where it's like we can get stuck in an endless loop of watching trailers and then not making a decision on anything. But it's funny that you mentioned about the Blockbuster.
I ain't got time for that.
Well, I know. I mean, you know, if she would listen to your decision, then maybe that would stop the cycle. But I can't help you on this one. But I have a funny Blockbuster story. So in the day when Blockbuster was still there, you know, I would go to get movies. Let's just say I was going out, you know, grocery shopping or whatever. Mm-hmm. And I would say to Dave, I'll stop into Blockbuster and get some movies for the weekend. So I would go in. And I'd come home and I'd be like, oh my gosh, I got these great movies. I got 3 of them. This one, and this one. Mm-hmm. And he'd be like, we've seen all of them. I'm like, what? And he's like, yeah, we've seen. Listen, CeeLo, I would do this so often where I would come home with the same movies that we've seen, not remembering that we had seen them, that I then became barred from actually going to Blockbuster. So Dave was the only one who would go to Blockbuster because, and wait, it now transfers to Netflix and Prime.
Yeah.
Because I'm still doing it on Netflix and Prime and I'm like, have we seen this? And he's like, yes. So now
100%.
What he does is he'll say to me, if we're looking for a movie or something, he'll say, what are you in the mood for? Right? Okay. Something comedy, drama, horror, whatever. I'll kind of say what I'm in the mood for, and then he'll like give me 2 options, and that's it. Just the 2 options. We watch the trailers for the 2, and then we pick.
And then you pick.
That's it.
I think that's a good idea.
Yeah,
the same thing happens to us as well, where I'm like, oh my God, this show looks so good.
Yeah,
and Mel's like, yeah, we've seen it. And I'm like, what?
Yeah.
I don't remember watching it.
Yeah.
And she'll like, yeah, watch. And she'll put it on.
Yeah.
And she'll let like 5 or 10 minutes go into the show. She's like, remember? And I'm like,
no.
I totally don't even remember. And sometimes it's like vague. And I'm like, maybe I've seen it, maybe I haven't. I still don't remember. And oftentimes it's like, yes, I remember the beginning,
Yeah.
but I don't remember what happens. And
Yeah.
likely that's because I've fallen asleep.
Yeah, yeah.
Sadly.
Well, Dave has this, there are certain shows that he really likes. So he makes fun of me for rewatching movies
Yes.
for like a million times. Like, so I've got some favorite ones like Pride and Prejudice and,
That
like,
you'll rewatch.
oh my God, I'll just rewatch those movies over and over and over again because they're just so beautiful and I love them.
You know what's kind of
Sense and Sensibility, all of
Those
those
are the
ones,
ones.
right? But he does the same fucking thing. He denies it, but he does the same fucking thing.
same thing.
He does it with all his sci-fi shit that he likes, right? And so what he'll do is if there is like a new release of some kind of, part 2 or part 3 of a sci,
Yes.
he'll be like, you know what we need to do? You won't remember what happened, so we gotta watch the
whole first
the whole first and the
part
whole
A.
second. And he's doing it on purpose because he wants to fucking rewatch it. I'm telling you, I'm onto him. I'm onto him.
When they're on Netflix where you start watching something and then it ends.
Yeah.
And then it's like 8 months later,
Yes.
part 2 or something comes
Yeah.
out.
Yeah.
And I said, Mel's like, oh my God, part two's here. We have to watch it. I'm like, okay, cool. But can we do it tomorrow? And tonight I'll just rewatch the last episode of the previous season.
You know what you should
I
do?
don't remember.
I know, it's because we're old. Oh my God, I feel old. But you know what? You know what you should do? If you go onto YouTube, you can usually say, give me a recap of this show.
Like the
over
first
the
season
last,
of
yeah,
whatever.
something like that. And then it gives you like the recap of everything up to the new season. Yeah. So do that. Do that. Because
didn't
then you
know
don't
that
have to waste your
existed.
whole time rewatching,
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of sad state of affairs, I guess.
It
but
is. It is.
Maybe it's because we're old, but also I just find in general where we start watching a show and I'm like, well, like let's find a series that then we're committed to for the next few weeks.
Yeah.
And we watch like an episode a night.
Yes.
And the next night,
Yeah.
or else, you
I know.
let that go for a week and you come back to me and we're like, oh, we're on episode 4. And I'm like, I don't fucking remember what happened in 1 through 3.
I hear you. I'm there with you. I am. I know. It
Sad state
sucks
of
getting
affairs.
older. I know. Okay. What's on the agenda today?
Well, today we're going to talk about purity culture. And we have a special guest joining us.
We do.
We have Jen joining us to talk a little bit about purity culture. And sometimes I've heard it referred to as purity circle as well. So welcome, Jen. Thanks so much for
Welcome.
joining us today. We really appreciate it.
It is a pleasure to be here for the second time.
Absolutely.
Exactly, right? Yeah.
You've had a very interesting life, Jen, and there's so many things that we actually want to talk to you about. And this is the second interaction we've had with you on this podcast. As Karen mentioned, the purity circle or the purity culture. I'll just give a quick little background from what I've read about it and how it kind of started. And Jen, I know that CeeLo and I don't have much experience with this particular movement. So we're completely fascinated by it. What I understand is that this purity culture movement is actually not something that is that old. It actually began in the 1990s.
Okay.
And there's kind of consensus around the table that it was actually started by a man named Richard Ross. And he actually started by kind of doing some sex education, kind of through a Christian campaign
Yes.
in 1992. Okay, so you're aware of that. And I think he called it True Love Waits.
Yes. Oh gosh, that
And
brings me back.
does it?
Yes.
Okay, so that's good. Good to
And
know that
flashbacks.
this is true. That's true. Yeah. Okay. So apparently, once he did this campaign, this sex education campaign in '92, the following year, the Southern Baptist congregations they kind of adopted this program, and they initiated a goal, kind of like a advertisement of let's get 100,000 purity pledges to be signed, and that was kind of how they were spreading the news. By 1994, there was a True Love Waits rally in Washington, D.C. There were about 25,000 youth that had attended, and they had collected about 210,000 purity pledges. And from that point on, this whole purity culture seemed to have just spread like wildfire.
Absolutely.
And then it really caught in a lot of religious circles, and off we go. So that's kind of the background that I have about this.
Yeah.
That is like totally giving cult to me. You know what I mean?
Well,
Not just a
we can
hat rack, my
debate this
friend.
with Jen. Yeah, yeah. I mean, because there's so many things about all religions that we could talk
Oh
about.
yeah,
I mean,
totally.
yeah.
Yeah.
Totally.
So,
But it's just because there's the one guy and he starts this campaign and
yeah,
then, and
yeah,
then rallies people around it. I don't know. Feels kind of
yeah,
Yeah. And I kind of get the
yeah.
point that they were trying to go for, but it's completely backfired, in my opinion, for many reasons.
Oh,
But
okay.
I get kind of where they were coming from. They wanted, it's strange the way it kind of snowballed after it came about. But I get that they were
Yeah,
trying to put some importance, uh, on waiting for marriage, but it sort of swung to the complete opposite end, to where it just started giving all kinds of messages to young people, men and boys and girls, that were very destructive. I don't think they, I don't think this gentleman had the foresight to see what he was starting. It's like, oh gosh.
Yeah. Yeah, 100. I see what I feel like I know where you're going with that, in that I think it's important to not necessarily wait, but to consider so many things as a young person,
Yeah,
getting into sex and making sure it's with someone who's important to you
yeah,
and that you're safe with. And like there's so many things around that I absolutely agree with, and
yeah,
that I hope I'm teaching my kids that. But sex education has friggin' changed so much in the school system, which
yes.
I think is awesome, because we got a letter home this week. Actually, my son's in grade 8, and we got a letter home saying that, so he had health ed and sex ed, but they're not just teaching about the physical part of sex, they're teaching about gender, they're teaching about consent, they're teaching about so
Good.
many. And the only bad part about this letter is that they're sending it to the parents with the option to for your kid to opt out of that, and I'm like,
Hmm.
no, that shouldn't be allowed. But yeah.
yeah, and it's good that they do that. I know that we never had that when we were in school. We just got the basic stuff, taught us about like the biology of your bodies, changes that you could expect to see, and a little bit about pregnancy. But there was nothing about who you are as a person, choosing things that are right for you, wrong for you, that kind of stuff. And without that information, the only thing that we end up having to go on is what's taught to us from either parents or religious circles and that kind of thing. So that also lends itself to what we know about religion, and the teachings of how women are usually to be subservient and compliant, and the men are the ones who should rule. And like, even just think about the old wedding vows, where I will obey, right?
Yeah. Mm-mm. Because I think the movement in itself, and the lack of the education surrounding the point they were trying to make, I think that is the biggest boo boo. It's just the shit hit the fan. Because there was so much missing information, and there was sort of this one thing that was so focused on, without the surrounding information that should have been taught alongside of it. And
Yeah.
so it just took off in a unfortunate way, I think.
Absolutely. I feel like it that the whole cult factor, and Bo, you were saying about religion, and the religious groups would jump on the chance to try and control, right? To have
Yeah.
the male to have the dominance and the women to be controlled, in a sense.
Yeah. Okay. So, Jen, when did you actually get introduced to the purity culture? Um, Tell us a little bit about that.
Gosh, I was in youth group around 1994, maybe even the year before. Oh my goodness, yeah. And so it was, and it was funny. I hadn't thought about that particular term that you guys use, the true love waits. That was exactly, what they were teaching us in youth group. And so, um, it's interesting because the messages that you get that aren't verbalized with this particular movement, it's interesting. Meaning, it it really put an importance on the body, but not in a good way. Like almost like your value is in your body and how you choose to use it or not use it. You know what I mean? Instead of like the individual, instead of teaching kids, young impressionable kids, the importance of, pleasure and, God making sex as pleasure, not just to procreate, but, mutual
Right.
pleasure. All of these different things surrounding, intimacy and intercourse and sex or whatever you want to call it. So it sort of gave this silent yet screaming message that, especially with girls, that your worth is in your hymen not being broken,
Yeah.
which is very dehumanizing, in my opinion.
Yeah. And, in one of the previous podcasts that we had done, I talked about how I had ended up staying with my rapist for 6.5 years because I thought that I was used goods. I thought that there was nothing left for me, that I was, I would never be able to find a man who would be willing to be my partner because I didn't have my virginity anymore. And, that kind of education and thought process that they put into you, and that importance that they place on specifically the women, is so detrimental to our well-being and the ability to actually do what's important and right for us.
I'm so sorry that happened. And that's very similar to mine. So from what I can remember, so long ago, I'm 43 right now. But so being in youth group, it almost seemed like it was geared. I don't remember the boys being talked to. I'm sure they were to a degree, but it almost seemed very focused on the girls, which also sort of gives you this message that, and this played out, further down the timeline of my life and many others, that you're responsible not only for your own quote unquote purity, but also the guys. Almost like you're responsible for what the guy is choosing. You're responsible to put up the boundaries, to hold to them, because alongside this message that was being taught, what also was being taught to the boys and to girls was that this crazy sexual drive that boys have, it's natural for them, but there's also like almost enabling this idea of guys can't control themselves, so it's up to the girl to put up the boundaries and to, you know what I mean? So it's kind of like the responsibility is solely on the girl, which is crazy to me. It should be both, people striving toward, whatever their goal is, whether it's under this teaching or otherwise.
Yeah.
Um,
I was kind of curious when you said like your worth is based on your virginity, that whole true love waits thing.
yeah,
Was that primarily messaged, like I'm assuming it was messaged to young people,
yeah,
but more so the pressure put on women versus the men, like to your point just now about the women taking on all of the responsibility, like
yeah,
don't be a tease or whatever. I don't know what that means.
yeah. Watch what you wear, dress modestly. Um, and some of the more stringent, which this wasn't in my church specifically, but there being a lot of rules around, hand holding and being alone with guys and just being more careful, which to a degree I understand, but it just, I think within religion, it can get very, very strict, which also gives off messages because when you're teaching girls to dress modestly, that's another kind of roundabout way of putting the responsibility on the girl. Because, I've heard many stories of people getting raped when they were very modestly dressed. It wasn't a short skirt or a tankini or, so this idea that rape can happen based on what you wear, it takes all of the responsibility off of the perpetrator and puts it on the
Yeah,
victim.
exactly.
um, so that's really unfortunate. There was something else I was going to tell you. This actually didn't happen within my youth group. This is something I've heard from other women that are sort of healing from this movement, but I've heard stories of youth group leaders, gathering the girls, the wife youth group leader, she takes the girls off to a room or whatever. And I've heard it done with roses, gum, and brownies. And I'll share with you guys the brownie story because this is just so gross. So she had the youth group leader, the woman had a pan of brownies, and she somehow cut. She was like, "Do you guys want brownies?" They're like, "Yeah, yeah." And then she had dog feces and ran the knife through the poop, the shit, and actually cut the brownies up with this same knife. And then she asked if they wanted the brownies, and everyone was like, no. And they pretty much used this as a picture of what happens when you lose your virginity before a marriage, that nobody's going to want you because it's akin to cutting up
Dog
crab
shit.
with, yeah. The used gum situation, that's another story that I've heard countless times where I don't remember exactly how it played out, but it was something along the lines of chewing gum and then trying to give it to another person, and that grosses the person out. So they're using that as sort of a word picture of you being used up, and no one else is going to want to chew you. Like, it's so destructive.
Oh my God. This makes me
So
feel ragey.
I know it's really, really bad. So that didn't happen in my youth group. Mine was wasn't as drastic as that, but it definitely was the conversations around saving yourself for marriage, that you're no good if you give in to temptation and slip up. Masturbation was definitely frowned upon. That was talked about a little bit, not a whole lot, 'cause it's sort of a taboo topic even at church. But this whole idea of just not being okay and very wrong to explore your body. And with the lack of sexual education that we had back then, all we had was movies and books and not Disney, because Disney doesn't talk about sex, but you know what I mean? Like these different entertainment situations, even pornography. So it's teaching you these different way instead of actually educating young adults on what sex is, why it exists, what it was made for, intimacy and connection and pleasure, and not just procreating, because there's a lot of churches that truly believe that intercourse is just to procreate. Like if you're experiencing pleasure, especially the woman, like you're a Jezebel. you know
And I think that the purity culture is, from what we had talked about earlier, part of that Baptist sect, if you will, of religion. I can say that for the Catholic religion, it's very similar in terms of they teach you that sex is for procreation as well. That's why, it's frowned upon to use birth control or anything like that within the Catholic Church. So, it's in a lot of religious teachings about how it is solely there for procreation, and it's not there for anything to do with pleasure, essentially.
yeah, especially evangelicals.
Yeah, and it's not all, like, so we're generalizing all religions, though, especially the ones that we're talking about, feel the same way, and it's taught the same way, or it's educated, people are educated the same way. But there are differences in the actual parishes that you attend, or the churches that you go to, because some, I just know for the Catholic Church, there are some churches where the teachings are extremely strict, and the parishioners who are following in that church, that's what they're educated on. And then there's other churches within the Catholic Church that aren't as strict as that. Some of the priests are a little bit more modernized, if you will, and so they're not taught as strictly about procreation exclusively.
You used the word education in that, which is totally false. But yeah, go on. Love it.
We have
Totally love
quote
it.
signs around education.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes, I am putting air quotes around education.
There we go.
This is such a great point, because it's sort of taught, for me, it was taught in a way that men need sex and women need to give them sex. So there's no focus on the woman's body, how it works, how she can also enjoy pleasure. It's almost, and this is something, it gets into this whole other topic that is very, very damaging, which is obligation sex. And this is where I fell into, along with other things. But this idea that men need it or they'll die, and that they can't control themselves. And in order, there's so many branches that come off of this, but one of the teachings that you sort of learn is that, your husband's going to either look at porn or cheat on you if you don't give it to him whenever he needs it or wants it. But there's no focus on the woman. There's no focus on that women need intimacy as well. Especially when you're trying to, cultivate a relationship and closeness and connection and intimacy, all that. So when it becomes obligation for the woman, that is the biggest libido killer I have ever experienced, because it's not about needing or wanting each other. It's like this transactional thing. And when a woman hears this message and she feels like she can't say no because her husband will then cheat or go look at pornography, it's based out of fear. So you're coming from a place of fear, feeling like you need to give it up at any time. There's no talk about consent. There's no talk about bodily autonomy and it being okay if you're not in the mood, or you just gave birth 2 weeks ago and your husband's wanting, sex, but you're still healing, from rips and tears, like, oh my gosh. So it's just, again, this message that's being taught to women that they don't matter in the bedroom, on a couple levels, which is unfortunate. So the obligation thing for me really got drilled in, and it was really rough. Also the message of, and I don't know if you guys have heard this phrase before, but the marriage bed is undefiled. This is something else that some churches teach. So it means that anything in the bedroom with your married spouse is okay, which it's interesting because some churches teach very strictly that some things aren't okay. Like some churches believe that oral sex isn't okay. That's like demonic or evil. But with the marriage bed being undefiled, which actually is in scripture in the Bible, and I haven't looked it up to share that particular scripture with you guys, but my ex-husband used that to his advantage because he was into some very things that at first, the way it started out, were very like kinks. But he had been sexually abused by a girl cousin of his when he was a preteen. And it sort of created this proclivity for certain things. And pretty much it was being humiliated in the bedroom for him to get off. Hopefully that's not too much TMI for you guys. But so when I wasn't comfortable with the things that he was wanting, I felt like I couldn't speak up and set a boundary. I was very much coerced into doing things I was not comfortable with, but it continued on because I just felt like I could not say no, that I had to be the submissive wife and say yes. Yeah. So it really, really messed me up. It was bad.
No doubt. And like, I can't believe that, like, I feel ragey having this conversation, especially
Same.
having two teenager. Well, yeah, of course you do. Or like having two teenagers now, right? That, you want to teach them that it is their body is in their control, that
Yeah.
they need to respect what they want and also what their partner wants, and make sure they're both on the same page and make
Yeah.
sure they're both being safe or whatever. So the idea that he can go back to the Bible and say, "Oh, sorry, you just have to do exactly what I want and what
Yep.
I say," blows my mind.
Two things I wanted to say. So I'll share this little snippet with you guys. So after we got married, the honeymoon night was very disappointing for me. And my mom actually reminded me that I came home when we got back and they were still in bed doing their devotions and stuff. And I came into their room and just crawled into bed with him and was bawling because it was just so disappointing. I was like, what is happening?
So, Jen, were you a virgin when you got married to your first husband?
No, I had 3 before I got married, which was also played into major internal trauma, spiritual
Yeah.
trauma, because I was just like, I messed up and I'm all used up, that kind of thing. But I don't remember exactly how, it wasn't long after we got married in our honeymoon, but I finally, in the relationships I'd had before I had gotten married, it was the intercourse was very one-sided, and I didn't know how to advocate for myself and actually ask for the things that I wanted in the bedroom because of these things I was taught. It was almost like I felt like I just needed to lay there and like let them do whatever. And because of my own upbringing and the lack of relationship with my dad, I definitely had daddy issues. So it kind of morphed, as I'm sure y'all have heard many times, where it can morph into wanting men's attention, especially sexually, to fill this void that I had missing regarding my dad. Not sexually, obviously, but just that father-daughter connection. So I had that playing, but so I finally gathered the courage. I thought, I'm married now. I can talk about anything with my husband. So it was really difficult for me, but I gathered up the courage to talk to him about it. And I remember we were sitting in the bedroom, in our master bedroom, and I brought up the things that I felt like I would like in the bedroom because I'd never had that before. And he looked at me and he said, that is boring. And then he called me vanilla and he said, I will never have sex that way. And wow. I was heartbroken, and I felt like I'd been slapped in the face because it had taken me so much to get the courage up to actually share what I wanted. And he just completely turned me down. So at that crossroad, it's a red flag for me now. And the person that I am now, I would have said, dusted off my hands and said, we're done. Like I'm a bye. Yeah. But at the time I felt like we're married. I have to be a submissive wife, and I guess I'll just have to do whatever he wants to do because that's the only way that we're going to be intimate. And at the time I thought I wanted to have children. I had all these things running in my mind, and I just felt like I had to put up and shut up.
What an absolutely horrible experience that must have been. And, to be, finally get the courage to actually talk about what it is that you want, and to have your husband, somebody who you're supposed to be trusting, shoot you down that way. I can just imagine how much more it makes you even more subservient, even more feeling like you're worthless, and that you must, follow their mandate of what they want instead of what you want.
Absolutely.
What I want doesn't matter. I need to play my role. You said something a couple minutes ago. Maybe it was Jen, maybe it was Bo, but if you don't have sex, your husband is going to look at porn. Now, I am no expert, but even if you are having sex, yes, people are looking at porn.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's not going to stop somebody that wants to watch porn. Exactly. Oh my goodness. Yeah.
So Jen, what did you actually think it was going to be like?
That's a great question. So despite the lack of education and information that I got, I truly, even at that point, saw, sex within a relationship or marriage, especially because of what I was taught. I had pictured two people coming together and exploring each other's bodies and figuring out your rhythm and figuring out what that person likes, what you like, and it being a team effort. And that was romantic to me, and it was passionate and fun in my mind, in my imagination. And so because he was incredibly selfish in bed and pretty much just used my body as a masturbatory tool, I felt very used and forgotten and neglected. And it just broke my heart because it was so, and I will admit that I think my expectations based on like movies and stuff, it was not solely based in reality. Because, it takes work to get to know each other and to find your rhythm and all that stuff. It's not going to happen overnight the first time, but it was so far removed from that, even an inkling of what I was picturing in my head and in my imagination. I was like, what is this? And he just seemed to not be interested in me at all. And he wasn't, so that was really difficult.
Do you find that carried through in other things as well? Like that weren't, bedroom related, that it was, hey, let's paint the walls of the house or do a major reno like Bo's doing right now, or where you basically had no opinion?
Oh yeah, definitely. Because I was also brought up and trained, unbeknownst to my parents, just by watching them, what was modeled to me as a people pleaser and codependent. So I was very much a yes person. I I don't want to say I don't think I ever said no to people, but my connection to people and my relationship with people was so hinged on me always saying yes in order to be loved, that when that happened after our marriage and then continually, it bled into everything. Like I ended up becoming a non-person that had no opinion, no feelings, like a robot. Many times I felt like I was sort of inside my head watching my life play out before me, and there was no control panel for me to use. It was just like, living
Yeah.
life as a robot.
And the yeah, and the guilt on top of it for feeling that, like for feeling that way and for not performing your duty as
Yeah.
a woman or as a wife, right?
Ugh. Yeah.
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 And so, like, they teach you that sex is not something that you should do before marriage, that it's bad, and that feelings or sexual desires are bad. And then you're supposed to just change those thoughts and those teachings on the day that you get married. And it's supposed to be a magical miracle of an event.
That you made such a great point too, because that's another thing that this religion tends to do when it's talking about sex, is that it's bad, it's bad, it's bad, and then overnight it's supposed to be good, like you can flip a switch. And that wasn't the
Yeah.
case for me, because I had had a couple sexual partners before I got married, so there was already this guilt and shame I was carrying, in regard to sex. And then now that it was okay, it took me until my 30s for me to be okay with sex and be open to pleasure and actually reveling in that, you know what I mean? And at that time, because I was married with my ex until I was 38, at that point he was very much disconnected from me and was withholding sex, and my libido was like kicking in at that point. And one time I broke down in front of him because, I did desire to have children, and we only talked about it when I brought it up. Like he didn't talk to me about kids at all. So when I would bring it up, because I'm like, okay, we're going to need to be intimate, obviously, to have a child. Like you can't do immaculate conception. So when I brought it up to him, it was so bad. He said, sex isn't that big of a deal. And then based off of my libido being revved up, he said I was an animal.
Oh, for fuck's sake.
Yeah. And so that even shoved even more guilt and shame on me. Like my high sex drive was this thing that he just looked at as bad. Now,
Right, because there couldn't be something wrong with him. It had to be something wrong with you.
yeah,
Yeah.
like if there's something wrong with you, that your libido is just revving. And that shut me down even more. But he did neglect me, and honestly, it was such a weird. What is that term? It's like where two things that are opposite are existing at the same time. Cognitive dissonance, I think it's called.
Yes, cognitive dissonance.
So, on one hand, because each year that passed after we got married, his sexual proclivities were snowballing. Like at first, it was him wearing pantyhose, and I just want to say this real quick. I respect other people that like to cross dress. That's their choice. But I was tricked. I felt tricked into this marriage because we had slept together before we got married once, and it was totally normal, romantic, the way I thought sex was going to be, you know what I mean, or supposed
Yeah.
to be, if you
Yeah.
will. But then after we got married, and he shared a story with me about his cousin where he was sexually abused. And at the time, I didn't know that was sexual abuse because of that whole idea of when it happens to boys or young men or men that, they're getting a round of applause because they're a guy and they want sex. But it was traumatic for him, but I don't even think he saw it as abuse. It just was very strange. So as the years were going on, it was almost like he needed more humiliation to get to the point where he could get off. So it just kept morphing into more and more things that I was increasingly not comfortable with, like wearing makeup and high heels and nail polish. And, it just, I just was so, and there was one time I tried talking to him about it and he just shut me down. And I was embarrassed at the time. And so that I couldn't really talk to anybody about it. I didn't know what to do. All I knew is that I personally was not comfortable with it, on top of the fact that I was being completely ignored. It was almost like I was a prop to his
Yeah.
fantasy. And I kept trying to talk to him like, I feel like your this whole thing with you with sex, it's more about the fantasy and these things than it is about being with me. And that was heartbreaking to continually go through. And as the years went by, the intimacy, oh, that's what I was going to talk about, the cognitive dissonance. So on one hand, I really wanted to be with my husband, but on the other hand, I didn't, because of the things that he wanted and how it was making me feel. Like, it made me feel dirty and used, and it just wasn't in my comfort zone. And I'm all for kinks, like some kinks, I'm I'm not a prude, but those specific things, even wanting stuff up his backside, like, I mean, it just was, and then having it put in
Well,
his mouth,
I
it
think,
just was really bad.
oh,
Um,
that's,
yeah,
that is, yeah.
yeah,
I think that, like, the tough part of that, like, to each their own, right? Like, whatever that ends up being, but like, sex is something between two people,
yeah,
and both people need to be on side with whatever, experimentation or plan or
yeah,
vanilla or whatever it is, right? Like, you can't, it's not, you don't get to make the sole decisions here
yeah,
when it's both of us, right? Like, it just goes back, like, the whole thing. Didn't you say the whole thing was the purity culture was created by a man?
yep,
Hello.
So, okay, I want to talk about just a question about the purity ring, or some kind of like process that I had read about, where you actually have to do some kind of ceremony with your father. Do you know what this is about, Jen?
What the
it's like a
fuck?
father daughter dance. I actually did not go through this particular one. I don't think our church did that, or if they did, I wasn't a part of it. So it's
Yeah.
sort of like this dance, this ball, but it's also this ritual, I guess, of some sort, where you're sort of signing a certificate to your dad that you're going to save yourself for a marriage, almost making a vow. Or I don't know if it's based off of just girls trying to make their fathers proud or something, but that gets a little twisted too. And that also takes away autonomy, because it's the girl's body. It's like, wait a minute. But, that plays right into a lot of religions where, like, I don't know if y'all, I just recently heard this phrase. It's a stay at home daughter, which is like the daughter is supposed to be under the father, the whole umbrella thing again. And until she gets married, she stays home and serves her father until she gets married, and then serves her husband. So it's so wackadoo.
I
Oh
can't.
my
I can't.
gosh. It's so weird.
I know, I'm feeling like I'm being educated, but I'm feeling so ragey at all of this that
Yeah.
I am like, what the?
Okay, have you guys watched the TV show called Shameless?
Yes, I fucking love that show.
Is that the one with Emmy Rossum?
Yes, yes, that's the one.
Okay, I have not seen it.
Okay, so I think it was either season 1 or season 2 of Shameless, one of the girls, so it was Joan Cusack, she played the mother. It was this girl's daughter, this woman's daughter, and her father and the mother were super religious, and the girl was kind of going off the chain a little bit. She was having a lot of sex, and giving guys blowjobs underneath the kitchen table when guests would come over, that kind of thing. Anyways, the father really didn't have much to do with the daughter at all, until she became interested in religion, and then all of a sudden there was kind of like this connection that he could potentially have with his daughter. So he actually talked his daughter into participating in the purity culture, and she attended a ceremony where it was almost kind of like a wedding. She kind of wore like a bit of a bridal gown, and so she actually got a wedding band from her dad, and basically promised that she would remain pure from that point on, until she actually got married. And it was interesting because to this daughter, she felt like she was really kind of connecting with the father that she had always wanted to connect with. So she was trying so hard to fulfill his ideas of what made a girl or a woman good in his eyes. And at one point, she ends up failing on that front. She ends up having sex with some guy, and the father finds out, and he actually treats her like a piece of shit. He starts calling her a slut and all this other stuff. Anyways, and it completely backfires. She ends up spiraling out of control. So just goes to show you how, I guess even in that TV show, how important it is sometimes for girls to connect and how easy it is for them to fall into this thing and the power that men sometimes have over them, especially their fathers.
Okay, I think I need to go back and rewatch this because I do not fucking remember that. Are you watching the British version or the US one? Because you said it was William H. Macy, right? What the fuck? I need to go back and rewatch.
Yeah, it's the US one. Go back and watch it for sure.
That's a really good point because it's sort of it's setting out the image of this connection with your dad and trying to make your dad proud. But that can get very twisted as well. I didn't have an emotional connection with my parents really. So it's like that roundabout way of getting acceptance and also connection for sure.
Yeah. All of a sudden this comes around and it gives you that opportunity to be like, oh my God, I'm close with my father now. I'm close with my dad. We have a relationship.
Yeah.
So,
We can talk about God
I
and
can
this
see
stuff.
like, yeah, I mean, I think that must happen for in multiple different kind of circumstances where kids growing up or teenagers don't necessarily feel close to a parent, and then something happens or there's a circumstance, no matter what it is, and all of a sudden there is that connection. You crave that so much, you don't want to let it go, no
Yeah.
matter what,
No matter
no
what.
matter how, wrong it feels or how backwards, right?
Yeah, because every child wants their parents.
Yeah, absolutely. So now I feel, especially, the whole blind faith thing, it's just so interesting to me, even psychologically speaking, because I'm a very curious person. I don't know if I talked to you guys about this the last episode, but I love asking questions and digging and challenging my current beliefs. And that really got shut off within religion earlier. And this curiosity that I love about myself. So then I guess it might have been in 2017, I did get into some conspiracy theories. But in that I can see how that can be very addicting, and it's calmed down. And now I'm more of a digger, and I hold loosely to things because I think it's ridiculous for us to think anything is solid and sure 110%, because there's always questions. There's always the potential of being wrong, and that's okay. So right now where I stand, I believe in a creator, and right now I still believe in Jesus. But the rest of this stuff, I'm like, there's so many contradictions. There's so many twistings of scripture and cherry picking, and almost leaders sort of putting themselves in the role of God instead of cultivating what Jesus talked about when it came to love, that it comes down to love, loving other people, loving your enemies, all of those different messages. There's so much that seems to be contradictory, like talking out of both sides of your mouth kind of a thing. And I hate
Yeah.
that. I'm like, no, I don't want any of that, and the very fact, like, we don't attend church, part of it is because Jason and I are both very free thinkers, and it's almost not almost, it is very much looked down upon, because I think a lot of churches believe in very strict, being in a box, black and white thinking, blind faith, and they don't seem to, at least in my experience, they don't seem to embrace the questions. They get very offended, very defensive. I mean, even to the point I've heard stories of people calling you, you're there's a demon in you, or Jezebel, or, and it's this whole defensive reaction that sort of, I think, encourages people to shut back down, shut that curiosity and those questions, which I think our creator created us to be question askers and to be diggers. And I embrace it now. Whereas before I really shut it down, which also played into, for example, being married to an abusive husband, that I just, I just became a robot. I didn't even question the things that he was doing, and he was doing some illegal things in our business, and there was financial abuse. There was a lot of stuff, and so it just kind of shut down that part of me that would put a foot down and say, "Hey, this doesn't feel right. This doesn't look right. I don't think this is right. Like this needs to change, or I'm going to leave." Because the whole
Yeah.
divorce thing, like divorce being a sin, and that was very much permeated in my mind. Like I felt like I had made my bed, I had to lie in it. But it was an impossible situation. So now it's
I think.
yeah.
Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No,
Go
you're
ahead.
good. Go ahead.
I was going to say that's the part of religion that I has never been attractive to me is the don't ask any questions, and we're going to take this and interpret rules for you to follow without anything behind it, and we're going to pick and choose which rules are important to us or not important to us, and that kind of thing just never really sat right with me.
Yeah, yeah, and stunted growth. It stunts your growth.
Mm.
Have you guys watched Lessons in Chemistry?
Oh, I totally did. I love that show.
Oh my gosh, it's amazing. There's a quote from that show where she's the character as a child is talking to the pastor at the church. And he actually said a quote, and I love it. It says, people who don't ask questions have blind faith, and blind faith is the furthest thing from faith. Because you're not thinking for
Oh,
yourself. You're an echo chamber. You're just a
that-
parrot instead of
that's
exploring
good.
it for yourself.
I think it's so important to I love that quote. Oh my
Yeah,
god.
I'll send
I
it to you
think it's so
guys.
important. Yeah, that'd be great. I'm sure that there are congregations, churches, other, offshoots. Go find yourself a nice united church, where they will, answer questions. They will take your chat. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
there's options out there, I think, for people who, really want to have that faith and have that community in a church. And I think maybe you just have to try and find the right one.
Yeah, I'd
I'm
probably get
I'm
kicked out of a
curious.
lot of them. Okay, bye.
Girl, don't even get me started, okay?
Oh my gosh.
Did your current husband grow up with, the purity culture as well?
He did. I
So
don't
does
think it was
he understand?
as not, I don't want to say bad per se, because mine, I've heard much worse stories, but he definitely did grow up in it. There was within his youth group, there was more focus on the girls than there was the guys.
Yeah.
But it also permeated his own thinking regarding his body and masturbation and sex in general. The guilt and shame, it's really hard to unravel. It's like trying to get gum out of your hair, where you still have this internal tape that's saying sex is bad, sex is wrong.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, he wouldn't mind me sharing this with you guys. He struggled with porn for a while, and then really and truly prayed for a long time to just have his desire for any of it to be shut down.
Yeah.
And it did work, but reawakening that after such a long time of not even looking at it or experiencing it or anything, he's working through his own stuff right now to
Yeah.
open that back up. So some of that I think is spiritual trauma. um
Yeah.
gosh,
And
just
it's good that you both have that, right? Like that
yeah,
not good, but it's great that you're both connecting in a way where you're recovering from it still together in a partnership
exactly.
as opposed to feeling alone.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I was
Yeah.
at I don't know if you guys, he really is, he's such an amazing guy. Oh my goodness, like 180 degrees different from my ex. Like, oh my gosh, which I am so grateful for every day. I don't know if you guys heard the story that came out a few weeks ago of a pastor in his sermon in Texas, Josh Howerton. He's a pastor of a megachurch in Texas, and this was just so horrific. They had just had a marriage conference that a bunch of people from his church went to, and he was sharing some of the quote unquote gold that he had shared at the conference to the congregation of the church this one Sunday morning. And he told us, he said he got this story from a mentor. After the fact, when the backlash hit, he kept saying it was a joke. But even as a joke, it's very, very damaging. But he pretty much said that girls, they've picked out their wedding magazines since they were 14, and they're dreaming about the wedding and the dress and the flowers and all this stuff. So he said that when the wedding day comes to the men, they need to stand where she tells you to stand, wear what she tells you to wear, and do what she tells you to do. And that'll make her the happiest woman in the world. Now, when he switches to the men's perspective, he said that boys and men have been dreaming about their wedding night since they were 14 or earlier. And that when the wedding night comes, that the woman needs to stand where he tells her to stand, wear what he tells her to wear, and do what he tells her to do. This is kind of like encapsulating the whole purity culture. I'm like, oh my gosh. And of course, many people within the church and without, because there's a movement happening in the church right now where women are really coming against patriarchy. And it's amazing to see. I'm like, thank you, God. Jeez, so damaging. And it permeates everything, in culture. But so then he backpedaled and he was like, it was just a joke. People are freaking out for nothing, the whole gaslighting and just completely not validating the people that it's hurting, this quote unquote joke. But that's it in a nutshell. My goodness.
Yeah. That whole people freaking out for nothing. I'm like, really though? I don't
Really?
think so.
It just shows a lack of empathy too, because, put yourself in someone's shoes, because really and truly a wedding day, all the preparations for a celebration, a party, shouldn't be compared to someone being intimate. Like they're not the same thing. It's apples and oranges.
Yeah. Well, exactly. Yeah, exactly. It is so fascinating to me. I feel a little less ragey now. I know, Jen,
Glad.
that you're in a better place now, so I feel better about that.
Oh,
But
I am.
right, like
It's
it
been a
blows my
long road
mind.
though. Oh my gosh. My mom even
Yeah,
told me a
no
few
doubt.
weeks ago, I was talking to her about just the experience that I was having as a teen. And I was very much embracing myself as a woman, and I loved dressing up and being pretty and sexy and all that stuff. So when she shared with me that while she was observing me as a teenager and a young adult, because I had embraced my sexuality in a way, she thought that she assumed that I knew everything and even more than her. She actually said, I felt like you knew more than I did about sex based off of what I was observing. So she never talked to me about it. It was like, oh my gosh, my parents, back when I was like in 5th or 6th grade, when they were teaching us sex ed in school, they had shared this book. I don't know if your parents shared this book with you. It's hilarious, but it's called Where Did I Come From? Do y'all remember this book from like the 80s? It's like this illustrated book.
Yeah.
Go on Google and look up, because the illustrations, it's really interesting. But that was all I got, was just this illustrated book for kids, on where do I come from. Oh my goodness. So yeah, there was just a very lack of all kinds of education flying everywhere.
Lack of education about the physical part of sex, for sure. I think there's definitely more education out there today. In fact, probably too much, given my kids' social media that they have access to, the stuff that they can see. But I think so many years have gone by with not enough education around, how it should feel to be with someone, and how, what consent means, and the whole gender identity piece. Like all of those things are just so important. And I'm glad that our school board is covering that with
That's
within my
good.
kids' classes
Because
anyway.
I've heard a lot of stories of girls coming through purity culture, and they don't know what a clitoris is. They have no idea that women's bodies can experience pleasure, because it's so focused on the guy, within purity culture,
Yeah,
and how much the guy needs it. That's unfortunate.
Blows my mind.
Oh my goodness.
Well, Jen, I so appreciate you for being so willing to kind of open up and share what your experiences have been. You've been right out there. You've been so honest, and I love that. I know that our listeners will appreciate hearing from you in that way, in that authentic way. And I'm sure that they'll get out of this episode something to take away and think about.
Yeah. Hopefully some of your listeners will know they're not alone with the
Yeah,
struggle, the
exactly.
aftermath, Yeah.
Yeah, and this is why these kinds of conversations are so important. It's to just shed that light on topics that, not everybody is aware of. And, for those that might be aware of it, how some of the effects of these things, kind of linger with us. So Jenn, thank you so much. It's always a pleasure having you on our podcast. We know we'll probably have you again for many other topics as well, but we definitely, exactly what CeeLo said, we appreciate your honesty and your authenticity on this topic.
Yes. Love it. Thank you, ladies, for having me on. This was just wonderful. Any other time you guys want to have me on, I am all for it. And I appreciate the both of you, and you're candid. I just love how authentic and open you guys are, especially the cussing. I'm like, yeah. Oh, it's great. Oh, can I say one more thing to think about real quick? Because this is an interesting thought, and it's not necessarily a question, but I had this thought drop in my head the night that we were doing our show with the purity culture situation. And I thought, sex is the only supposed sin that changes from a sin to a non-sin due to marriage. And that is so odd to me based on all the other teachings of other sins. So that too makes it a little more nuanced and difficult, It's like, that's so weird.
That's definitely an interesting way of thinking about it. Thanks for that little tip.
Thank you so much, ladies.
And thank you so much, Jenn. Until next time, this is Bo.
And this is CeeLo. Thanks for taking a seat at the table today. We love our... Thanks for taking a seat at the table today. We love our dinner guests.
Don't forget to subscribe and follow The Dinner Agenda on the podcast platform you use so that you don't miss any new episodes. You can also follow us on Instagram and Facebook at The Dinner Agenda.
We look forward to hearing your comments, questions, and even ideas you may have on future episodes.
Thanks for taking this journey with us.